Hello, all. This is Dr. Dave Maslach talking to you about reciprocity.com. The E is written with a 3. And in this particular video, I want to talk to you about what it's like to be a professor and talk to you about some of the pros and cons, advantages, disadvantages of being a professor, particularly within a business school, because that's what I know, because I am. So if you don't know me, I'm an associate professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship, and I created this whole reciprocity project to give back as much as I possibly can. There were so many people that helped me out that I wanted to pay the favor forward and help you out as much as I possibly can. All right, so what's it actually like to be a professor? Well, I think for most people, there is this belief that being a professor is really dry and boring, and that maybe you're imagining somebody that's actually talking in front of, it's 1,000 people or something at a university. Particularly the people that have not been exposed or don't have anybody in their family that's a professor, which was me. I was very much that way. I didn't even leave. I lived in a very small town. There was no university for 4 hours was the closest university. So, a lot of people have these sort of imaginary views, particularly what it's like from how they're depicted on TV. Or television. It is a lot different than what actually is going on. And we think that it's very dry and boring, that it's very maybe a professional or sort of staunchy kind of career, or you have this sort of imaginary thing where, the professor has the crazy hair and they're sitting there in an office on a big sofa chair. That's not at all what it's like in any sort of way. It's actually one of the more tougher careers that you can choose in terms of the competition and the feeling of it. It's very dynamic in many different ways. So what are some of the advantages of being a professor? I think of it in a lot of different ways. It's something like juggling, where you just don't have a lot of time to do any individual thing, and you have many different things that are in the air. And you're trying to sort of balance all those particular things, right? So you might go and run and teach a class very quickly for an hour, and then you have to do service, which means you got to go and do a couple of meetings. Maybe you got to go and do some research. So most of us, for the vast majority of what we do as professors, is do research or try to devote as much time to research, right? So you can imagine the way that most professors sort of imagine this is that we like to do research. And so all the other stuff is kind of stuff that we have to do. And so we're always trying to come back to our own research. And that's the thing that sort of gives us, it's like currency, or it's like money within academia. The more research that you have, the more papers that you have, the more that you can travel, the more that you can go to prestigious universities, all sorts of things like that. So we're always getting pulled back in towards doing our research as much as we can. And so you'd run to, you run to your class and you run back and try to get some research done. Maybe you go and meet with a colleague to talk about some research, and you come back and work on your own thing. It's very much kind of juggling in many different ways. And some of us sort of juggle different components of it, but that's basically what you're looking for, right? So the teaching service and research, and we're juggling those in different different ways. And depending on your role within the university in terms of who you are, we juggle and place different weights on different things. So the other thing I wanted to mention, and I mentioned earlier on, it's very competitive, right? If you didn't know this, that most university systems are set up like a meritocracy or a competition. It's less so much, people would argue with meritocracy, which means that for whatever effort you put in, you're going to get equal returns for that particular thing. But it's more along the lines of a competition where, that you're competing in a global arena, and it's very much imagining yourself as if you're a professional athlete or a lawyer, for example, in global law. Where you're competing with everybody else, and you're trying to compete for these different spaces in terms of who you are as an individual, and sort of your recognition and prestige. The more prestige you are, the bit easier it is to go to different universities. So if you have a Nobel Prize, then you could go to any university you ever wanted to. If you have, a conference paper, or you just have something that you've been working on and nobody has recognized it in any sort of way, good luck getting to any particular university around the world. Even the worst possible universities are not even going to look at that at this moment, or look at you as an individual to hire you on and bring you on their faculty. So that's what we're looking at, right? So it's very competitive in many different ways, and the competition, we do, a lot of people do all sorts of things with competition, right? And you could expect the exact same things that you'd expect in, if you're competing for the 100-meter dash, you'd expect all the same sort of behaviors and people doing all sorts of weird and crazy things in many different ways in terms of getting to the global stage and to the world stage. I'm not saying that everybody is sort of deviant in many different ways, but we're all humans, we're all people, and so there's all sorts of things that could possibly happen. And so there's systems in play to ensure that everything is done as fairly as possible, but we're measuring sort of performance as clearly as possible, right? So you can imagine that the closest thing is to think about professional athletes or world-class lawyers, engineers, accountants, whatever it is, and we're all competing for a small number of spaces around the world. And that's really what the competition is like. I guarantee once you're in it, you're like, oh my God, I didn't realize it was so competitive. But it really is. And there's lots of jockeying that happens as well. So the third thing is that it actually can be pretty rewarding in terms of an advantage, right? So we do have a lot of things that are really fun and that are rewarding, but you have to stick with it. So the rewards are generally, 10 to 15, 20 years out by the time you actually get those rewards. If you take a step back, for most professors would recognize this, if you take a step back and you look back, that they would recognize that they probably had a pretty interesting career because they have done all these different things. And it is competitive, and it's mildly a meritocracy, right? That or moderately a meritocracy that the more effort you put in, the more likely you're going to get from the career. Right, so if you view yourself in the long run, you do get to do a lot of really cool things, and you get to talk to all sorts of people around the world over the long run. In the short run, in months or whatnot, you'll spend a lot of time in your office, but every once in a while, you get to do some really rewarding things, like talk to famous entrepreneurs, famous scientists, all sorts of things like that, and sometimes you'll travel. If you're older and you're really well recognized, you travel a lot if you choose to. I mean, all sorts of things like that end up happening that can make it very rewarding. And you kind of choose and design the career that you want to do and who you want to be as an individual within academia, which is kind of unusual. You can imagine it is very akin to being an entrepreneur, and you can build whatever you want to build and sort of design your career as much as you can. You have a lot of influence on your own career. So there are disadvantages, and I've talked about these before. The first thing is that there actually is a lot of mental health problems and health problems in general that happens due to sort of this competitiveness that happens. We're all competing against each other. And so some people can work a crazy amount, or they work a lot for a little bit of time, which drives a lot of competition. And then, those people will end up getting either mental health problems, because they've been working tremendously for, maybe if you work tremendously for, 5 years or 10 years or whatever it is, even for a matter of a couple of months, and you're isolating yourself from people and you're working all the time, well, that could cause a lot of mental health problems. So we do see a lot of that within graduate students, within professors. It's really common to see this kind of stuff. Because of the social isolation that happens. And then you get these health problems that are really weird. Every graduate student will go through this when they starting out with a career. You'll end up like pulling a muscle, and you're like, what? How did I pull a muscle doing that? So I remember opening up a door and I pulled a muscle because I was sitting too much, and then I was sore for a good couple of weeks. My back's been all jacked for. It comes and goes in many different ways, right? So this is kind of normal stuff because you actually have to sit there a lot and just realize that is going to happen with you. And hopefully with this channel and what I'm trying to do with the whole reciprocity project is it's not going to be nearly as much of a problem going forward, because I'm trying to help and walk you through some of these things. So, another thing that ends up happening is that most positions, are not sort of professor positions. Well, you might think that they're very social. I had this sort of view going into it. It's going to be very social. It's not, because you're working alone a lot of times. So even when you work in groups, you do work alone because that's how work gets done. So you have to work on something, and then you meet, and then you kind of go in these sprints, right? So you end up working alone for a bit, and then working with somebody, and so there's this going back and forth thing. So there is isolation that happens just because this work requires a lot of deep work, right? Where you have to think about things. And so just expect that that's going to happen as well. And then the other thing that happens, as a disadvantage, I don't want to get into too many of them, but often people will postpone major things in their life to dedicate to the career, right? Because it is very competitive. It's very difficult to get professor positions. So a lot of people will postpone, things like, getting married, having kids, buying a house, all sorts of normal, quote unquote, normal life things that happens to many people to dedicate to their career. And because everybody else is doing that, then in order to compete, you have to do that as well, right? So then it sort of creates a sort of system where everybody is competing and sort of pushing off life decisions. And sometimes people push things a long time before they actually choose to do something about sort of their life. And if you don't make that as part of your life, then you're going to do that and push it off until, for example, kids. There's only a certain amount of time that you can have kids before you just can't do that, right? So, so that's the things to sort of think about, is that is a very real component of it, that many people sort of postpone these kind of things, major life decisions, because they're dedicated to the career. And I'm not saying that that's bad, but just expect that as kind of a disadvantage in terms of comparing yourself to normal population. As well as, I mentioned before, it takes a long time before you actually start making a significant amount of money that you do get, return on investment and stuff like that. So there's all sorts of disadvantages, but often many of us feel that there's the advantages, the sort of intangible advantages, are really, really nice. And they sort of outweigh some of the, the disadvantages, the more concrete disadvantages that you see. And so hopefully with this project and the whole reciprocity project, that we can sort of tilt the scales towards people being really optimistic and having fun with the academic career and just enjoying life. So even when they do feel isolated, they can come and watch some of these videos and realize that they're totally normal. And this will sort of propagate and become a bigger and better thing. And that's the whole goal with the whole reciprocity project, is to change the world with one little video at a time. All right, so if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. Do subscribe to the YouTube channel. I do appreciate it. Take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.